When he was 4 years old, he'd sit himself down in front of the family's television set with a pad and pencil. He would draw a hockey rink on his pad, and as the game came on, he would, without looking down once, trace the path of the puck, just watching the screen, but writing on his pad. When there was a break in the action, he'd glance down and look at his schematic and began to teach himself the spatial relationship on the ice of hockey players in relation to the puck. His father would turn his backyard into an ice skating rink every winter there in Alberta, province of Canada. He wasn't the strongest or the fastest player. What separated him was not that he could go where the puck was. It was that he knew to place himself where the puck was going to be. He's known simply as the greatest. In a 2018 documentary on the life of Wayne Gretzky puts this in proper perspective. The documentarian posits this. He says you can't teach athletic greatness. You can only encourage it or stifle it. I don't know if Gretzky would agree with that, but that's what his observer said during that documentary. I suppose that in athletic greatness, that may be true. But I do know that in true greatness, that is not true. You cannot teach greatness. Greatness only comes in one way. And this morning, as we look at the life of Abraham, we see Abraham's greatness, not because there was something innate in Abraham, but because there was someone that Abraham was following. Let me give you the setting of chapter 14. In chapter 13, Abraham separates from his nephew Lot. He allows Lot to choose which area of the promised land Lot wants to settle in. Lot chooses, being a selfish person, the most fertile land, and he pitches his tent near a very evil town named Sodom. And it is where we get our term sodomy from, because Sodom was a depraved people. But Lot threw in with them. In chapter 14, it opens with the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah, along with 3 other kings who had state or nation states there in that area, aligning themselves against a very powerful king of another confederation. And his name was Kedor Laomer. I'm going to call him Kedor for the rest of our time together. But Kedor had 4 other kings from nation states with him, and he vanquished Sodom, Gomorrah, and 3 other areas and made them pay very horrible taxes. They did that for about 12 years. And at the end of 12 years, they got together and said, we haven't seen Kedor for a while. Maybe he's dead. Maybe he's forgotten about us, but let's not pay. And they all said, yeah, let's not pay. And for a year, things went really good until one day they looked up and saw dust on the horizon, a lot of dust. And it scared them, but by then it was too late. Kedor had come, and his other 4 kings had come to battle it out against these 5 kings. And there wasn't really a battle. It was a total rout by Kedor and his kingdoms over Sodom and Gomorrah and their other 3 kings. In fact, they were such poor generals of warfare that they led their own troops into their own trap. They had outside their cities tar pits, petroleum bubbling up. That's why OPEC is still around today. They had sand blown over it through the wind, and so people who weren't familiar did not know that if they stepped through there and trod through there, they were going to get sunk into this crude oil and die. They were so bad at telling their troops what to do, they led their own armies into that. I imagine Kedar sat there on a hill looking at this saying, guys, don't do a thing. These idiots are killing themselves. Well, they vanquished the town, Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities there, and Kedar took all that was worth anything as plunder, and everyone, every live body, children, women, and men, back with him as slaves. A servant in the household of Lot was able to escape and ran over to where Abraham was and told him about the situation. And this is where I want to pick the story up. I want us to look at Abraham's greatness first by observing his reaction to Lot's capture. We read, when Abram heard that his relative had been taken captive, he called out the 318 trained men born in his household and went in pursuit as far as the city of Dan. What did Abraham do when he heard Lot had been captured? What would you do? Lot. That little punk. That kid who, when I gave him choice, of course, chose the best. That kid who saw God work miraculously in our trek from all the way over to the Canaan into Egypt, God delivering us miraculously because of a misstep by Abraham himself, and then restored him all his wealth. Lot only had wealth because he was hanging on Abraham's coattails. And then he picks the best land for himself, and then he puts his tent right next to the most depraved city in the known world called Sodom. And lo and behold, Sodom gets vanquished and Lot gets taken captive. Now, the human heart says, you made your bed, so now you must. Doesn't it feel good when you see that happen? Can't we be real here for a moment? Pretend we're not all saints. And just say, when somebody who's been warned, somebody who knows better, who's been getting every benefit, but turns their back on the truth, and then all of a sudden the truth hits them square in the face. Doesn't that just renew your hope that God is an Old Testament God and He's going to pay people back? Don't you just love that? Don't you just love it when somebody that have asked you for your advice and you gave it to them and they said thank you and turned around and did the opposite, and then it all blows up on them? Don't you love the feeling? And though you may be too humble to do this, to put your hands proverbially on your hips and go, next time maybe you'll listen. That's what happens when you don't listen to smart people like me. Abraham didn't do that. He could have. He certainly would have been within his rights. It would have been understood that anybody who knew Abraham would have said, yeah, Lot chose, and Lot's now got to pay. He wanted to dance, and now here's the music. And he's getting to face it now. Abraham didn't do that at all. He immediately, the word choice there in the original language tells us that he called out and took his men immediately, quickly, with urgency, to go and save his nephew. We don't read anywhere in this chapter, in this story, where Abraham scolds Lot after he brings Lot to safety. He doesn't scold him, even after Abraham has won a great victory. What we see here in Abraham is great people don't judge others for having troubles, even troubles they brought upon themselves. They don't engage in self-congratulatory talk, in letting people bask in their greatness by letting them know how terrible they have been or choices they have made. Great people see the crisis of another as a call to action, not a call to gloat or to feel satisfied. How would you respond? How would I respond if someone had to sleep in the bed that they made themselves? Before we answer, we must answer this question. Do we know someone more powerful than us who, when they saw us getting near to reaping the consequences of our own actions, did not gloat, but instead did everything they could to save us? Let's move on. Abraham's greatness is also found in resourceful warfare tactics that he examined and showed and exhibited during this time. In verses 15 and 16, we read that during the night, Abram divided his men to attack the force of King Kedar, and routed them, pursuing them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus. He recovered all the goods, brought back his relatives Lot and his possessions together with the women and other people. Abraham knew something. He knew that the force he was going up against was much greater than his force. 318, although trained men, were no match for the thousands in Kedar's army. But notice the contrast. The kings of Sodom and Gomorrah were so inept that they led their own men into their own traps, where Abraham, on ground that he was not familiar with, not his home ground, knowing nothing really about the topography other than what he could see when he got there, had God lead him to a great victory by doing exactly what God asked him to do. Abraham's greatness stems from the fact that he let the Lord use his resources. And great people will let the Lord use their resources to accomplish more than we can. You and I will not talk ourselves out of greatness. We will say, I may not have much to offer, but if I humbly go to God and let him use whatever I have, God can do great things. David told you of a story of a missionary who started children's ministry. We have missionaries in this room right now who could tell their own stories, who would say, I never thought that I was overly gifted, but God, through whatever I could bring, has used this mightily. You should get to know some of our missionaries. They have tremendous stories. They don't tell them out loud to a lot of people because they don't want to gloat, because it's not their glory they're concerned with. But God can use anyone who is willing. But many of his followers will talk themselves out of it. Say, well, I don't have anything God can use. That's the point. God uses what people look at as nothing, and he uses them to do things people couldn't imagine ever happening. Why? So God can receive the glory. Abraham wasn't a practiced war tactician. He was a goat herder. That's what he knew. He had camels and goats and some farming. That's all. He didn't know warfare and tactics, but God used him mightily. God always uses the few to overcome greater numbers. But there's another point to this that I want you to see. And that is the part where we hear that Abram, after he routed Kedar's army and they fled, Abram didn't sit there and count the gold they left behind. He pursued them until the job was done. Don't you think Abraham had a little bit of temptation? Don't you think some of his 318, there was one guy who said, hey, are we just going to leave this here? Can't we fill our pockets? I can run just as fast. Can't we? Abraham said, let's go. We haven't finished the job yet. He was tempted probably, but he didn't succumb. One of my favorite pastors, writers, his name is Ray Stedman. He's dead now, but he preached for many years out in Palo Alto, California at Peninsula Bible Church, which he started. And through his writings, I've gained just tremendous support for my ministry and encouragement and knowledge. He tells a story that he was in a conference in New England one time while he was pastoring there in California. And he stayed at this little bed and breakfast in Vermont. And he was the only guest there that week. And every morning he would have breakfast in their beautiful dining room. There's lots of tables in the dining room set for people of parties of 2 and 4. And he was the only one there, so he had time to look around, and he noticed that every table had on it the same table service of a salt and pepper shaker and a creamer and a sugar bowl. And they were made of this beautiful pewter. And he thought to himself, he's telling his congregation this when he got back, I thought to myself, I'm going to take one of these. There's so many of them, they'll never miss them. They probably have a whole kitchen full of them they can replace. This is so nice. I'm going to pack this on my luggage and bring this home and give it to my wife. Now his congregation was like you, going, really? Man, that's evil. And he said, no, I didn't take it. And there was a general sigh of relief in his congregation, he said. A week later, he walked into his study at the church there, and someone had placed a gift on his desk. He opened it up, and it was one of those pewter table settings. Someone in his congregation had contacted the bed and breakfast and said, could you please give my pastor a set that he didn't steal but wanted to? And so they gladly gave it to him. He brought it into the pulpit with him the next week and showed the congregation, someone gave me this. He goes, I made a bit of a mistake. What I really lusted after at that bed and breakfast was the large screen TV in the room. Later on, he said, I never received a television. But he was tempted. Even great men and women struggle with temptation. You're not great because you're not human. That doesn't make people great. Even great men and women struggle with temptation. They struggle with it. It's going to hit us. It's going to hit them, even when you're following Jesus. And as we take on tasks God has for us, we have to finish them before we're worried about or concern ourselves about a possible reward. Abraham showed that you get the job done. Everything else comes later. Don't get tempted to stop and try to redeem for yourself something along the way of the path. And so we see in his steelness of getting the job done, his warfare tactics, and how he related to Lot, even though he could have just said, Lot, you really deserve everything bad that's coming to you for the choices you've made. He did neither of those. He also had resistance to self-promotion. Abraham did not choose to promote himself. We read in verses 17 through 24 that after he came back from defeating Kedar and his armies, that a priest we don't know anything about, named Melchizedek, came and blessed him. Now, you may have studied Melchizedek. He's also mentioned in Hebrews. We're not going to go into that. But Abraham was blessed by him, a priest of God. And Abraham, recognizing who Melchizedek was and who he was from anyway, immediately gave him 10% of all that he had. Something else happened when Abraham came back. Well, actually, maybe not happened. Neither the king of Sodom nor Lot ever said thank you. There's no record of any of them saying thank you. No, what the king of Sodom said to him was, Abraham, you can keep everything you got back for us. It's yours. You can have it. Just give us the people. Now, what you have to understand is that was no gift at all. The law of the land was if you went to war and got somebody's possessions back, because you risked your own life and limb, those possessions now were yours. You owned them. And so the king of Sodom came up and said, hey, Abraham, you own all this, but I'm nice, you can keep it. And Abraham said, oh, guess what? I don't want any of it. I don't want any of it, because you're going to say that you bought and paid for your redemption, and that belongs to the Lord only. I won't take one thread from you. If you want to pay the men that help me, pay them. They deserve it. But I am not going to promote myself, and I'm not going to allow you to act as if something you've done gave you redemption today. It was only through God. Great people have little need to be thanked. It's not their motivation to be thanked. They don't keep a journal with a listing and a heading of people that never said thank you. That's not their motivation at all. You are great when you come to the rescue without calling attention to yourself. Allowing God to see and God to repay is a mark of greatness in a follower of Jesus. But here's the other thing we have to understand. True greatness is only bestowed by God. You can't gain true greatness by doing anything on your own. You and I cannot be truly great. Only when we follow God can we be truly great. And here's the great thing about Gretzky. The way he studied hockey and the way he played hockey is a lesson for us. He would have to tell some of his coaches in junior hockey and in school, no, that's not where I need to be. I know where I need to be. He had to swim upstream for thousands of games until people realized that he knew more than most of his coaches. When you and I choose to follow Jesus, the world is not going to understand why we place ourselves in the places we are. They're not going to understand why we do the things we do. They are going to deem them as worthless and wrong, while we need to know that if we're where God puts us, doing what God tells us, are where and doing exactly what we need to do. That is true greatness. Take this with you. Once heard about a Scottish woman who was introduced as Mrs. McIntosh, a woman of great faith, and she said, "No, I'm a woman of little faith, but I serve a great God." 4 characteristics of true greatness. I got this from Chuck Swindoll's writings. He said the first one is genuine unselfishness. Great people don't find their motivation in personal gain. That's not why they get up in the morning. Genuine unselfishness is the first mark. The second one is self-sacrifice. Self-sacrifice, putting themselves in a place of harm even in order to help someone else. Great people possess a willingness to sacrifice their own wants, needs, and comfort for the sake of others. Missionaries do that. You don't have to be a missionary to be great. And maybe there are some missionaries that aren't great. But people who have turned their back on their own culture, adopted a different culture, and gone through all the ups and downs of that, are doing what God asks them to do. But when you refuse to get back at a neighbor, when you refuse to pay back what someone is owed because they mistreated you, and now you have an opportunity, and you say, "I won't do that. In fact, I'll find out a way I can help them." That is a mark of greatness and self-sacrifice. The third one is probably somewhat alarming to you. Certainly, business schools would say, well, this is wrong. But the third one is gentleness. I don't think there is a business class you can take where the key to success is being gentle, to being meek. Did you watch the Kentucky Derby yesterday? I didn't either. It's over in 2 minutes, but the show is somehow, for some reason, 3.5 hours long. I just listened to the highlights as they come across the internet, I guess. But a horse won yesterday, of course. But it reminded me of a story I heard about racehorses. And they were talking to jockeys and trainers, and they said, most people who aren't jockeys and trainers don't know this, but the best horses that win most races are those that are most gentle in their nature. Most people think, well, no, you want a fighter. You want one that doesn't want to lose. You want one that's hard to train, because that means when he gets on the racetrack, he's going to be fast. And what the trainers and jockeys say is no. The problem is those horses tend to fight all the time, even leading up to and into the starting gate. And they're bucking and everything, and the gate opens, and they're still busy fighting, being in the gate. And they're too dumb to run out of the gate because they're too angry about being put in the gate in the first place. Meanwhile, the other horses are zipping down the track. The ones that win are the ones that hear what the jockey says and does it immediately. They are the ones that win races. The most gentle, the most meek. The fourth mark of greatness really is the word that you could boil all these first three down into, and that is humility. Great people never become overly impressed with themselves. That flies against every human instinct. We tell children now, when they're kids, you're great just for showing up. You're great just being you. You don't have to be anything to be great. You were born that way. Folks, that is the exact opposite of the wisdom that comes from heaven. We're not born great. We're born rebellious. We're born evil. And left to our own devices, that's exactly what will happen in our lives. We'll perpetrate more evil. Athletes are told they're great when they come to a place of success and they start believing it, and it's a problem. Muhammad Ali once said, it's hard to be humble when you're as great as I am. It's hard to be humble, period. But if you think you're great, I would say it's near impossible. If you truly believe that you have achieved greatness outside of what God can do, then you don't understand true greatness at all. You have substituted a lie for the truth. There's only one path to true, and by true I mean eternal, forever, lasting greatness. Gretzky, as great as he is, and apparently a wonderful person in his own right. Other athletes who can be humble off the field are truly great people. But can I tell you something? One day, no one's going to remember their name. As great as they are now, no one is going to remember why they're great, if it's athletics or some business or some other attribute they were able to develop or win. Forever, 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 the truly great are going to be those who showed humility. And the only way you and I have a chance to do that is to humble ourselves before a holy, perfect God and say, I'm not good the way I am. I'm not great the way I'm born. I have no hope. Great people acknowledge their failings and help others overcome theirs and deal lovingly with the unloving. If you are not sure that you have come to the place where you've asked God to forgive you of the imperfections. You're not the worst person you've ever heard about, but you're also not great, and you'll never be perfect. And the problem is that's what it takes to get to heaven. If you realize you don't have the power to ever get there, would you ask Jesus to be your Savior today? He's calling out to you. Would you hear him? If you're listening, if you're trying to hear Jesus, if you're praying to him this moment, would you do me one favor? Fill out this card. Tell me on the back that you need to talk to me. There's a checkbox down here. If that's true for you, go ahead and check that. But give me a way to contact you. Let me know you want to talk to me, and you'll be hearing from me this week. I'll be glad to have a conversation with you about that. But only Jesus is the perfect model of greatness, and only by following him can we hope to be great. I'm going to ask the ushers to meet me down front as we prepare for communion this morning. As they do so, let me pray. Father, we do not want to settle for greatness on our own. We're only great because you show us the pathway to follow. Let us do so. In Jesus' name, amen.